Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and its tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
And my name is Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed Navy videos of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that the government has admitted that UFOs are real,
Or at least that the videos were authentic.
it raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
Right? They may still be unlikely. But there's so many explanations for these stories. Even if the truth is more mundane than you're hoping, if any of it turns out to be true, whew,
Woo! It's a very exciting time. All right, y'all. Welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time. I am coming at you solo this week because Chuck is on vacation in Mexico. And, the plan was that, Chuck would take a few weeks off and so would I. There'd be a break in the recording. And, then the biggest UFO story in 5 years broke, like the week he was leaving. So it's been a week since we last uploaded. We put up our recording last week about us reacting to the David Grusch story. Uh, and it's now been another week, and I didn't come into this intending that I would upload a new podcast every week, but stuff just keeps happening. So we're going to talk about it today. We're going to get into it. And Chuck said he wanted to know if anything happened. So I'm very excited to let you know, Chuck, that yeah, stuff is still happening. So first of all, when we recorded last week, we mentioned that Ross Coulthart had a video interview with Grush that was going up that night, actually. So a few hours after we recorded. That video obviously has since dropped, and it covered all of the same ground as the article in the debrief, but it also went a bit further. And I want to go over a few of the additional claims that he made in it because some of them are kind of buck wild. So, first of all, Grush talked a little bit more about how he came into this investigation and what brought it about. So, he said he has seen and verified evidence to back all of these claims. He has seen photos and documents, and his job on the UAP task force was essentially to research and corroborate witness testimony, which led him here. And he investigated this for 4 years before believing it was credible enough to submit to the DoD Inspector General. Um, he said, quote, I started out as a non-believer. I came to the problem as a hardcore physics guy, an intel officer. So I have a high bullshit factor. And I was very methodical. I was interviewing people who didn't know each other, making sure this wasn't some kind of cover up of some other program. I thought it was totally nuts. And I thought at first that I was being deceived. People started to confide in me, approaching me. I had plenty of senior former intelligence officers who came to me, many of which I knew almost my whole career, that confided in me that they were part of a program. They named the program, and I had never heard of it. They told me, based on their oral testimony, and they provided me documents and other proof that there was, in fact, a program that the UAP task force was not read into. Now, we talked about that program last time. This is the crash retrieval program. Um, what I don't think was clear in the debrief article is just like Admiral Wilson, he once he knew the name of the program and he supposedly had the clearances to access it, he tried to gain access to it and failed. He said, quote, they shut the door in my face. They denied me access to these programs. And that's when he filed his DOD complaint, and that was talking about the fact that this program is illegal. It's exempting itself from appropriate supervision. It's not reporting to Congress the way it's supposed to. So that was what the DoD Inspector General report was about. And then as a result of that report, his identity and the fact that he was speaking about this was leaked, and he started suffering reprisals. Um, as I mentioned in our previous episode, he doesn't talk about what those reprisals are, although Ross Coulthart talked a little bit about some things that have happened to Grusch. He said his house has been broken into. He said he's been placed under surveillance, etc. So as a result of the reprisals, he ends up filing the whistleblower complaint with the intelligence community inspector general that we talked about last time. And that's what got us here. That's when it came public. So, to my mind, this background adds a bit more credibility. I mentioned this last time. The thing that I like about Grusch is he doesn't seem to have been seeking publicity, and he wasn't a true believer in the topic from the start. He came into this grudgingly, slowly convinced over time, and he didn't start out by going public. He started out by following process. He went to the DoD Inspector General, and then when that went wrong, he went to the Intelligence Community Inspector General, and it's only now, when all of that has been struggling, that he has been working with Congress to create proper protection for whistleblowers and to speak more publicly. And even now, he is still not presenting evidence because that evidence is classified. And unfortunately, he's catching a lot of flack for that. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about some of the other claims that he made in the program. He mentioned that people working with recovered UAPs have gotten sick. Quote, a lot of them were injured looking at some of this stuff. You can imagine the nuclear, radiological, and biological risks to looking at an unknown, and a lot of them have literally suffered because of their service. Now, this lines up again with something else from the NDAA that always seemed kind of weird. The NDAA specifically asked Arrow to look into health effects of people who have been exposed to UAPs. And that seemed to kind of come out of nowhere. It now seems clear that that was something that Grusch was telling them to look into. Like, hey, there are people in service who have been injured and exposed injured as a result of exposure to things that the government says don't exist. Another interesting detail that came out in the interview, Ross Coulthart asked him about Dr. Kirkpatrick, the head of Arrow. And Grusch says, well, I know Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick for about 8 years now, and I expressed some concerns to Dr. Kirkpatrick about a year ago. I told him what I was starting to uncover, and he never followed up with me. He has my phone number. He could have called me. Um, so unfortunately, this plays into what we've been hearing, that I would like to believe that Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick is stuck between a rock and a hard place and he's doing his best, but there is a growing contingent of people who feel that Dr. Kirkpatrick is himself part of the effort to cover this up or at least kind of stonewall the investigation. And finding out that he talked to David Grusch a year before he went public and was told about all of this stuff, that's pretty damning. So, now probably the biggest claim that Grusch made that captured headlines is uh, Ross starts asking him about like historical UFO crashes. It was pretty clear that Ross was trying to get back to Roswell, which is kind of commonly regarded as the start of the modern UFO phenomenon, arguably the first UFO crash. Um, and Grush says, or at least strongly implies, that Roswell did happen. It was true. But he then makes an even bigger claim. He says the Vatican helped the U.S. recover a crashed UFO following the collapse of fascist Italy. Whoo! As a friend of mine said, I'm not surprised to find out that the Vatican is involved in a big cover-up. But yeah, Grush's quote is 1933 was the first recovery in Europe, in Magenta, Italy. They recovered a partially intact vehicle, and the Italian government moved it to a secure airbase in Italy until around 1944 or 1945. The Pope back-channeled that and told the Americans what the Italians had, and we ended up scooping it. Oh my God. That's one of the fascinating things about Grush's claims is how they echo rumors that have been going around the UFO community for years. So we have heard for many, many years this idea that the US swoops into other countries and takes over UFO crashes that happen there. Um, Maybe the most one of the most well documented examples is the Brazilian UFO crash in Virginia, where they were investigating it. They took all the pieces to an airbase, and then the Americans swooped in with the C-130 and took everything away. Well, now we're finding out that goes back to the 40s, like post World War II, and 44, 45. This is like 3 years before Roswell. So this would definitely move the date back earlier for when the US involves, and 1933 is when he's saying this crashed. So um, all of a sudden, we're looking at, rather than the modern UFO era extending back nearly 80 years, we're looking at the modern UFO era extending back 90 years. So we've got nearly a century of this cover up happening. And, now the Vatican's involved. um, Grush says that multiple operational craft have been recovered. Quite a number of crafts overall have been recovered. Grush says at least 12. Um, and Ross kind of guides him. He says, what about bodies? And Grush says, well, naturally, when you recover something that's either landed or crashed, sometimes you encounter dead pilots. Um, you may notice that Grush has been very careful to avoid words like alien, extraterrestrial. He uses the word spacecraft, but he kind of implies that it's not the right word. Um, this ties into a lot of ideas that we've heard for a long time, that the extraterrestrial hypothesis may not be sufficient to cover what's going on here. And we touched on this in an earlier episode with the idea of, UAP may be time travelers. There's also extra dimensional stuff. So um, I just find it kind of interesting that he doesn't say we recovered dead aliens. He said we recovered dead pilots. Um, Another thing he said that got quite a bit of attention, but unfortunately has almost no details, is it's strongly implied during the interview that the U.S. government may have an existing formal relationship with some of the non-human factions. Um, the quote he had is, "There are agreements that risk putting our future in jeopardy." Um, Unfortunately, there's just not a lot to go on. He just kind of says that and moves on. But I will say, again, this ties into long-term rumors. There have been rumors for many, many years that the US government, at least, has some sort of arrangement with the uh, the extraterrestrials that um, in exchange for advanced technology, they're able to abduct a certain number of US citizens per year. Now, we're getting very into conspiracy territory, but I'll just say that, like, again, this idea that not only do UFOs exist and everything, but there has been some sort of like secret treaty or arrangement is kind of a long-term theme in the community. So it's interesting to hear Grush echo that. And last of all, Grush kind of brings it back to the scandal of this is less about what the non-humans have done and more about what the humans have done and what the US government has done. He strongly implies that the U.S. government has killed people to keep this information suppressed. He avoids coming right out and saying it, but he very clearly hints at it. And he sticks more concretely to claims of at least white collar crime, right? We're talking about um, financial appropriational issues, but also an ongoing broad UFO disinformation campaign being perpetuated against the US citizens by the US government. As part of this campaign, Grusch says that some true or factual information has been presented or pushed along with false claims or disinformation in an effort to muddy the waters. Again, this is a thing the community has been saying for years, that there are disinformation agents embedded in the community actively telling wild stories, but with bits of the truth seeded into it so that if bits of truth do leak out, they can be discredited because they're lumped in with larger, more extreme things. Um, so anyway, that was Grush's video interview. Uh, as Ross said, he spoke to Grush for over 7 hours on camera. We've since found out that that was actually two different sessions, one of which was kind of like a rehearsal for the main one. So it's probably not 7 hours of unique footage. It's probably more like 2 to 3 hours of unique footage. Ross said on his podcast that he expects that they would be able to edit it down to, something like 120 to, 160 minutes. So he's still hoping to get that released. So we will have more of a full unedited interview, but I expect we probably got the meat of what Grush is claiming at this point. Um, so the main thing that I want to talk about today, the thing that I think is interesting, is it's now been 2 weeks since David Grush came out. And what I would have expected is that the government would have shut this down because it makes them look bad, right? I would have expected that they would have come out and been like, no, this guy's full of shit, or hey, it turns out this guy has a drug problem, or anything to discredit him at all. And there's been nothing. It's just crickets. The closest we got was the DoD putting out a press release saying that Arrow has found no evidence of these secret programs. But again, that makes sense. It's that isn't quite the denial that the DoD seems to think it is, because Grush's whole claim is that he was part of the UAP task force, which we know had better clearances and accesses than Arrow does, and he was denied access. So if the UAP task force was denied access and Arrow has fewer clearances, of course Arrow would be denied access. So saying that Arrow doesn't have access is kind of pointless. Someone on Reddit put it really well. They said this is kind of like if your mom turns to your dad and says, "You're not allowed to look in the freezer," and your dad says, "Okay," and then you go to your mom and ask, uh, "Do we have any ice cream?" And your mom says, "Ask your dad." And you go to your dad and you say, "Do we have any ice cream?" And your dad says, "I have no evidence that we have ice cream." Well, that doesn't mean anything. He's not allowed to look where the evidence would be. So anyway, is it a cover up? Is it nothing? Are they just hoping it'll go away? I don't know, but I was expecting that by 2 weeks in there would have been something. And so far there's nothing. It's just his claims are still just out there and no one has been able to debunk them. The closest anybody has been able to say is he's not presenting direct evidence to the public. But as he's pointed out repeatedly, he has shared direct evidence with the ICIG, who said they found his claims urgent and credible, and he has shared that evidence with Congress. So I think we need to wait and see. Ross and a few other people have promised there are more whistleblowers coming, including possibly whistleblowers who have had direct access to the program. Um, yeah. So the next thing I want to talk about is, naturally, we've been talking for a while now about how the House is supposed to be having UAP hearings. So a lot of people have gone to Congress and gotten quotes from different members of Congress. Um, and surprisingly, there seems to be a growing bipartisan interest in the topic, or at least a willingness to not reject it outright. Now, a few people did, they said no comment or they kind of laughed it off, but more than you would have expected gave quotes about it. So first up, we got our buddy Representative Tim Burchett, who is going to be heading the upcoming House UAP hearings. Um, he was asked whether Grusch would testify at those hearings, and he says, "We would like to get him there. It's premature to say who we will have there. We're waiting on approval for several people, and then when we get that, we'll move ahead with firming up a date. We've got security concerns, and we just want to make sure we have our ducks in a row." Um, I think it's interesting he said that we have security concerns. I don't know if he means that they're worried that uh, David Grusch being there would cause a like circus atmosphere and there'd be a lot of members of the public, or whether he means that they're worried that there might be an attack on David Grusch. But either way, as usual, it's interesting to see Tim Burchett, who's going to be chairing the upcoming hearing, taking a very clear stance that yes, we're interested in this. Democratic Representative Jared Muscovitz was quoted as saying, "I saw Chairman Comer come out and say oversight is going to have a hearing on UAPs. I support the chairman. I think there are important questions to ask. And if there are things the federal government is holding back from the American people, then the American people have a right to know." Um, Pretty safe statement, right? He's not coming out and saying like, "Oh yeah, I believe in the UFOs," but he's not shying away from the political scandal. And I think that uh, Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal and others like them have been right to focus on the political scandal of this, because I think it's easier to approach and act on the idea of things being improperly concealed from Congress than it is to approach the idea of non-human intelligences. Uh, Democratic Senator Kristen Gillibrand uh, asked about Grush's claims, said, "I have no idea, so I'm going to do the work and analyze it and figure it out." Um, she kind of went in a particular direction with it that I really liked. She said, "We need to look into whether there are rogue special access programs that no one is providing oversight for. The goal for me will be to have a hearing on that at some point so we can assess if these SAPs actually exist." Um, Now, it's worth mentioning that she is sponsoring an amendment to the upcoming NDAA that will mandate that no money can be spent on an SAP unless it's been reported to Congress. And she said, quote, "So if there are SAPs out there that are somehow outside the normal chain of command and outside the normal appropriations process, they will now have to divulge that to Congress." Um, I think that's a really positive step. I applaud her like trying to get a loophole plugged up. I will say I don't think that would stop it. Like the point at which we have a long-running illegal SAP, I don't doubt that they have other ways to acquire funding, so we'll see. But still, I appreciate that she's taking it seriously and addressing the like legal concerns around it. Republican House Majority Leader Steve Scalise kind of echoed her concerns. He said, "Obviously, we're concerned about Congress being kept in the dark from a lot of these agencies." Um, Again, it's easy to see them focusing on the political angle of, hey, congressional oversight is the part that they care about. In the same way that for previous years, flight safety was the easy way to get into talking about this without getting laughed out of the room. Now you can talk about congressional oversight. Republican Senator Josh Hawley was quoted as saying, the takeaway from last spring's UAP briefings is they had thousands of sightings of these things over the years, which was news to me. So I'm not surprised necessarily by these latest allegations because it sounds pretty close to what they kind of grudgingly admitted to us in that briefing. It's not good. None of it is good. I think we want to get to the bottom of this. I think it's disturbing. So, another rounding endorsement of the idea that um, there is a perception that the military has been holding out on Congress and not sharing everything, and they're increasingly upset about that. This last one here, I'm just going to quote directly from the Washington Examiner, which wrote about this. It said, Republican House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Turner has expressed skepticism as to what Grusch is alleging. As a member of the Gang of Eight, Turner receives briefings on the most sensitive U.S. military and intelligence efforts. That he does not appear to believe Grusch would appear to suggest that Grusch's classified testimony to Congress has either not been corroborated or that Turner has not received adequate briefings. This reflects a deeper concern that numerous people in the military, intelligence community, and Congress who have the clearances and credible mission need to know about a UFO exploitation program apparently do not know about it. This could be because of the conspiracy that Grusch alleges, or because such a program does not exist. I think that's a really good summary of what we're dealing with here. Right now, for us in the public, there is no way for us to tell the difference between there's no evidence of this existing because it doesn't exist, and there's no evidence of this existing because, as Grusch alleges, there's been a cover up. At the end of the day, the only sane response to that is we need to look into whether the cover up exists. So it's not definitive, but I I think it's really interesting to see more and more congressional interest, and that they are still kind of playing it safe with sticking to the political and legal issues as opposed to the larger implications of non-human intelligence and over a century of interactions. And the last thing I want to talk about tonight is a journalist named Michael Shellenberger has come out with additional sources who confirm Grush's claim. Um, Michael Shellenberger, that name kind of jogged my memory, and I looked into it and immediately started groaning because I was like, oh, that's right. This is one of the hand-picked journalists that Elon Musk worked with to release the quote-unquote Twitter files that he alleged would reveal all sorts of, concerns of woke inappropriate behavior at Twitter, and none of it actually ended up meaning anything. So Michael Shellenberger is one of those journalists. He is also the author of numerous books claiming that climate change is overrated and nothing to worry about. So I just want to be clear, just like when we talk about Tim Burchett and other people like that, I don't endorse the guy himself, but he has made some really interesting claims that I think are worth looking at, even if I don't agree with most of what he says in other spots. And I'm just going to quote several bits from his newsletter where he talked about that. He says, multiple sources close to the matter have come forward to say that Grush's core claims are accurate. These individuals are all either high-ranking intelligence officials, former intelligence officials, or individuals who we could verify were involved in the U.S. government UAP efforts for 3 or more decades each. 2 of them have testified, including as recently as last year, to both Arrow and Congress. These individuals said that they had seen or been presented with credible and verifiable evidence that the US government and US military contractors possess at least 12 or more alien spacecraft. I know of at least 12 to 15 craft, said one person. Every 5 years, we get one or two recovered for one reason or another, either from a landing or that we catch or that they just crash. The sources shared their evidence with Arrow, which Arrow has refused to provide to Congress. The reason Arrow, quote, has not discovered any verifiable information, end quote, they said, is because it does not have the authority to verify it and may not want to verify it. The sources all expressed anger and frustration at the Pentagon's denial of the existence of non-human craft and material. The denials coming out of Susan Go and the Pentagon are specifically chosen to use Arrow as the source of information when Grusch has already addressed that Arrow did not have access. So of course they didn't discover anything. The sources differed on whether the US was able to operate the craft. Quote, as far as I know, we're not able to operate them, said one person, who said they were last briefed on the crashed craft 5 years ago. There are people who say we have reverse engineered them and are flying them, but I never found any support for that. And I found a lot of support for saying we can't figure it out. If we do, it would be in some program at a higher security level. So yeah, I don't know. I hesitated to bring this up, but a lot of people in the UFO community are talking about it. At the end of the day, it seemed weird not to address it. Um, I find Michael Shellenberger suspect, his judgment suspect. Um, I find the fact that all of his sources are anonymous to be suspect. But at the end of the day, these are people who are saying that what Grusch is saying is accurate. Um, they're confirming the idea of 12 to 15 craft. We'll see what happens. Schellenberger implied in an interview that some of his sources would be coming public or at least be speaking to Congress soon. So, we'll see what comes of it. So, like I said, it's been 1 week since we last talked. It's been 2 weeks since David Grusch came out. Um, and it kind of feels like everybody's just waiting for the next thing, like the other shoe to drop, either for something to happen that would invalidate David Grush's claims, that would find some reason to make his judgment suspect, or for more information, for more confirmation. And we've gotten a little bit of a trickle about it. We've got some strong implications that Congress is going to keep looking. But at the moment, it feels like we're 2 weeks in and nobody's been able to say he's wrong. So anyway, that's what I've got for you. Thanks for listening. I have no idea if I will be recording another episode in a week or if we'll wait a couple weeks. It'll really depend on what happens. But in the meantime, thank you for listening to me talk about UFOs so my wife doesn't have to.